A new variant of coronavirus has been discovered in South Africa, and this is raising concerns. Scientists there are warning that the variant could show immune evasion and enhanced transmissibility. Joining me now is President Biden's chief medical advisor on COVID, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Sir, thank you so much for being with us this morning. This is obviously a very significant day as we try to look at what the risk factors are here with this variant. What can you tell us about this?
Well, certainly there is a new variant that is now in South Africa in the Gauteng province that has some mutations that are raising some concern, particularly with regard to possibly transmissibility increase and possibly evasion of immune response. We don't know that for sure right now. This is really something that's in motion, and we just arranged right now a discussion between our scientists and the South African scientists a little bit later in the morning to really get the facts, because you're hearing a lot of things back and forth. We want to find out scientist to scientist exactly what is going on. But it's something that has emerged in South Africa and seems to be spreading at a reasonably rapid rate, in the sense of when they do test positivity, they're seeing that it's a bit more widespread in South Africa than was originally felt a couple of days ago. So it's in a fluid motion. We're finding more about it, and literally it's something that in real time we're learning more and more about.
Is it possible it's already in the U.S.?
You know, of course, anything is possible. We don't know that. There's no indication that it is right now. It seemed to have been restricted. There were some cases that originated in South Africa and that went to Botswana, and people who traveled and found out they were infected, and one that had gone actually to Hong Kong. So there's a lot of travel. You never know exactly where it are, and that's the reason why we're getting together to them to try and get the precise molecular makeup of it so you could actually test for it. And that's something that'll take a little bit to put the appropriate materials together to do that. But we are in very active communication with our South African colleague scientists.
So explain to us the questions and the concerns about how this might evade immunity, because there are so many mutations here on the spike protein, which is what the vaccines that we have are designed to hit. The question is now going to be, right, is that spike protein still permeable when it comes to the vaccine?
Yeah, that's what we're going to be finding out, because when you look at a mutation, it can give you a hint or a prediction that it might evade the immune response. What you need to do is you need to get that particular sequence of the virus, put it in a form in the lab where you can actually test the different antibodies. So you can have a prediction that it might evade, or you can actually prove it. Right now, we're getting the material together with our South African colleagues to get a situation where you could actually directly test it. So right now you're talking about sort of like a red flag that this might be an issue, but we don't know. Once you test it, you'll know for sure whether or not it does or does not evade the antibodies that we make, for example, against the virus through a vaccine, or following convalescent after you get infected. When you get antibodies, do those antibodies protect you against this new virus? The answer is we don't know right now, but we're going to find out for sure.
So, you know, in the meantime, the UK has banning air travel from some of these African countries. Do you think the U.S. should consider doing that?
Well, I mean, obviously, as soon as we find out more information, we'll make a decision as quickly as we possibly can. You always put these things on the table, but you don't want to say you're going to do it until you have some scientific reason to do it. That's the reason why we're rushing now to get that scientific data to try and make an informed decision about something like that.
Mm-hmm. So if the U.S. does start to see, and yes, I know that we're awaiting more information, we need to understand how this works, but if the U.S. does start to see these cases of this particular strain, what immediate measures have to be taken?
Well, first of all, you want to find out if, in fact, it does evade the vaccines that we're doing. I mean, there's always the possibility of doing what the UK has done, namely block travel from South Africa and related countries. We don't know that. That's certainly something you think about and get prepared to do. You're prepared to do everything you need to do to protect the American public, but you want to make sure there's a basis for doing that, and that's what we're doing right now.
And I know that you're watching some states that are already dealing with a surge in hospitalizations, like Michigan, which we're tracking. What does that tell us about what these next couple months are going to look like?
Well, again, I keep saying it over and over. The next couple of months are going to be up to us. I mean, right now, we have a tool, a very effective tool. We have too many people, 60 million people or so, who are adults, who are eligible for vaccination, who are not vaccinated. We've got to get them vaccinated. There's no reason whatsoever not to vaccinate them. We also know that the boosters, and this is really very, very clear, the boosters increase the level of protection dramatically, particularly in those individuals who have waning protection. And we do know it's a fact that after several months, people, particularly the elderly, but across the board in the age group, you have a diminution in protection over several months, which is the reason why we're recommending that everyone 18 years of older who has received the vaccine get the booster. You get a booster now, you can get into the winter and have a higher degree of protection. That's the reason why we're pushing so hard for people to, A, get vaccinated in the first place if you're not vaccinated, and B, if you have been vaccinated and you're 6 months or more following an mRNA or 2 months or more following the J&J, go get your booster. It really is important as we enter into this colder winter season.
Yeah, I got boosted 2 days ago. I was so relieved to be able to do it and can't wait to know that I have that full effect of it here in a couple of weeks. I do want to ask you about the singer Bryan Adams and his COVID diagnosis, because I know a lot of people are going to be trying to figure out what's going on here. He announced that he has tested positive for COVID for the second time in a month and that he's in the hospital. He says he's fully vaccinated. What do you make of this? Twice in 2 months? Is this the same infection you would expect? What do you think?
It would really be foolish for me to try and speculate. I don't know anything about his case. It could be that he continued to have virus in him and that he tested positive and never really got rid of the virus in his system. We find that when some people who are immune compromised, that they can have virus lingering on. I know nothing about his medical condition, so I'm really very reluctant to make any comment about it.
Related, are you aware of any situation where someone has tested positive for coronavirus, maybe, 2 different strains in the course of a month, or you've not heard of anything like that, right?
We have people who have tested positive, and generally you clear the virus after a few days, who, because of a compromise in their immune system, they just continue to have the virus at a low level in their body. Sometimes that is interpreted as reinfection when it really is not reinfection. It's a persistence of infection. But again, as a physician, I don't want to comment on somebody else's medical condition because I do not know what's going on with that person.
Yes, completely understand that. I did want to talk to you about something that I asked your former colleague under President Trump, vaccine czar Brett Giroir. I asked him about Deborah Birx's testimony about that questionable August 2020 testing guidance that said asymptomatic people who had been exposed to COVID didn't necessarily need to be tested. Here's what he said.
After 2 weeks of discussion, we decided that was the appropriate guidance, and Dr. Fauci did sign off on it. Dr. Redfield published it in the CDC, and that was the guidance. It was highly misinterpreted by the public and the media. And to be honest, Dr. Birx thought it might be that way, and it was revised within 2 weeks. But everything was done in a scientific way.
Is his description accurate and complete?
This is taken out of context. I don't know what the entire conversation with him is, Brianna. So I don't really want to comment on it. You've taken a little clip. He shows it, and I don't know what the whole context of the conversation was. So I don't really want to get into that.
Well, what's your question about? I did the interview, so I can tell you. What's your question about the context?
So what is the situation? What is the question you're asking him? That's what I like to know. What is the question you asked?
Okay, so
him?
Deborah
You're giving
Birx,
me the answer. I don't know what his question is.
I'll make it clear. I'm not trying to trip you up here. Yeah. Deborah Birx testified before the House committee that's investigating the COVID response. And she, along with a number of other officials, were basically saying that the Trump administration was meddling when it came to scientific guidance. And then I asked him about that August 2020 guidance that came out and said that asymptomatic people didn't necessarily need to be tested if they'd been, exposed to COVID. As you'll recall, when that came out, it was doctors were looking at that saying, what's going on here? This is like ripe for people being exposed and not getting tested. And that is what happened. It ended up being revised. He was basically saying that there was an effort. When I talked to him about this, he said they were trying to test, that was a priority. It's not that they were trying to reduce testing with that guidance, that there was a discussion about it. You were on board. Deborah Birx ultimately on board, signing off on it. He ultimately signed off on it. He said Deborah Birx had some concerns there. And he also, I will tell you, in that interview was saying that President Trump did not want to reduce testing, even though we know publicly that he said he did. So my question is what he's saying there, complete, that this was yes.
Right. Obviously, people who are hearing have no idea what we're talking about, but believe
there's a lot
Deborah
of people
Birx,
listening to us who know what we're talking about.
Believe Deborah Birx. If the fact is that we wanted to test people who are asymptomatic as opposed to just symptomatic people, Deborah Birx and I have always said we wanted to test people even though they're asymptomatic.
So what happened?
Well, first they began testing only people who were symptomatic, which means you miss a lot of people who are asymptomatic. Because if you have more widespread testing, you obviously have more people that you've identified are positive. If you don't test asymptomatic people, it looks like the level of infection is much lower.
Has Brett Jawab been, has he been honest, in your opinion, about how he's describing the testing priority under the Trump administration?
I don't want to get into giving comments about who's been honest and who's been dishonest. I can only speak for myself. And I have been extremely truthful in everything I have said throughout the entire pandemic, now almost 2 years. I'm not going to comment on what other people say. Sorry.
Okay. Well, so let me ask you about something he did say about you, which is he said ultimately Deborah Birx signed off on this, ultimately you signed off on this. And I wonder if there's more to that description.
Well, I don't know what he's talking about. As you know, the story goes, I was actually in the hospital when that was signed off on, so I don't know what he's talking about. I was having my polyp from my vocal cord removed at that time, so I wasn't there when they gave this final sign off. So I'm not sure what he's talking about.
All right, sir. Dr. Fauci, thanks so much for being with us. It's a critical day as we're watching South Africa trying to figure out what's going on. We appreciate you being with us.
All right, thank you.